Chapter 28. No doubt that the horsebox op had been a success. Even the heavens opening mid-raid hadn't dampened proceedings, or not metaphorically anyway. There had been plenty of real damp. In fact, Fraser's jeans were still a little soggy. She was feeling a weird mix of euphoria and hysteria, prone to making silly jokes and laughing inappropriately. She'd even indulged in a small dance outside the interview room once she and Harley had got their confession. From one perpetrator anyway. The other had remained stubbornly silent, only allowing the words no comment to pass his lips. Fatigue, probably. It had been a long day, and the one before even longer, with the added emotional fallout of dragging poor Marianne's skeletons out of the cupboard. Now it was nearing 11:15 and time to go home at last. Only she didn't feel like going home. As she waved a triumphant Harley off in the station car park, an urge to text Marianne visited her, just to see she was all right. It was too late to call, but she should explain why she'd suddenly disappeared, make sure Marianne didn't think it was anything to do with the day before's revelations. Then she might head back to her office to write up her report for Pitbull about Wiltshire Sam's call and her chat with Sally Parker. If he was even interested. The man seemed strangely incapable of pursuing more than one line of inquiry at once. Right now, John Davis was his only focus. Still, if she'd read things right, no one was in imminent danger. She took her phone from her pocket, switched off since they had started the raid at Hamperley, and pressed it into life. A barrage of notifications flashed across the screen, but only one caught her attention. Minutes later, she had swung the Land Rover out of the car park and was heading for the A488, her foot flat to the floor, siren on and blue light flashing. She abandoned the Land Rover outside Marianne's cottage, barely remembering to turn off the lights as she grabbed her bag and torch. She set off up the path at a run, still struggling into her stab vest. From the house she heard the dogs barking and wondered again at the woman's idiocy. To go up there at midnight with no protection. Admittedly, the dogs could have done more harm than good, but at least they might have acted as a deterrent. She would far rather that one of Marianne's dogs suffered at the murderer's hands than that their owner did, because now she knew who the murderer was. Only a hunch, as far as Pitbull might be concerned maybe, but deep down, with the instinct born of years of experience, she knew, and no one on his team had a clue. If it hadn't been for Wiltshire Sam and Sally Parker, she wouldn't have worked it out either. Without the night's development, she could have waited until the next day to share her certainty with the DCI, but now, whether the note left for Marianne was from the murderer or just another confused player muddying the investigation, she knew the woman was in danger. The evening's flash downpour had left the path slick with water, shining like a silver ribbon in the moonlight. In the narrower parts, fronds of wet bracken clutched at her legs, and before long her thighs and calves burned with effort as she pushed her pace. She might be fit enough on the flat, but her fell-running days were long behind her. The gradient of Perkins Beach would challenge the most experienced athlete. No way could she reach the ridge by midnight, and if anything happened to Marianne, or that boy, she would never forgive herself. It was her fault as much as Chowdhury's that Pitbull had gone herring off after the wrong man. Between them, they'd set up the perfect conditions for the murderer to believe they'd got clean away with it, allowing them to create a scenario to pin the blame on a credible scapegoat. Twice she stumbled, once falling hard on the knee that a skiing accident had caused to be rebuilt some years before. She cursed and gritted her teeth through the pain, forcing herself onward and up. Would her messages have got through to Pitbull and Corby? Emerging from the cover of the trees was like stumbling onto a stage set lit for night, all greyscale from palest silver to deepest black, and bathed in cool ultramarine. In her parents' kitchen back on Mull, there was a painting which showed a horse and cart crossing a moor at night, the whole rendered in varying shades of blue. That cart could be before her now, only the track ahead was narrow and stony, with steep banks either side which barred any view of the ridge. On she scrambled, clawing at the rocky banks to propel herself upwards, ears on elastic for a sound to tell her that anyone was near. At last she was out of the cleft, and onto the bare plain of the nature reserve. Ahead lay the boulder field which surrounded the Devil's Chair. More slowly now, placing her feet carefully in the ankle-breaking hopscotch game underfoot, she moved towards the tower of rock. She stopped suddenly as voices reached her, cutting the still air. A woman and a man. A few steps more and she rounded a bend in the path. The Stiperstones Ridge unfurled before her, straight out of a science fiction movie. Moonlight glinted off sharp-edged quartzite boulders, amongst which lurked tufts of blackened heather like giant grasping sea anemones. Rising out of it all, like the ruins of some dystopian castle, 3 rocky edifices stretched out in a line. Before the nearest, as though frozen in a tableau, were 2 silhouettes. Marianne she recognised, though she was all in black. Opposite her was John Davis, and suddenly he threw back his head and howled words of outrage and innocence. I didn't kill anyone. Fraser crouched low, relaxing her abdomen to get the breath back into her burning lungs. For the moment at least, Marianne was safe. She stood before the Devil's Chair, rigid, one arm raised, holding something like a truncheon, more frightening by far than John Davis, who looked almost deranged as he tore at his hair. More words from Marianne, and then another wail escaped him, high and keening. In the stillness that followed, Fraser heard, just too late, a scuff of rubber soles on rock and movement in the air behind her. Pain fractured her head as a stone smashed at her skull and she fell forwards onto hard, jagged ground. Thank God for her stab vest. Without it she would have broken every rib. Someone was on her back, dragging her arms behind her and pinioning them with one hand, while with the other they tried to grind her face against a spike of rock. She strained backwards, the muscles of her neck and back locked to resist, but the weight of her attacker, the force of a knee grinding into her pelvis, pushed her inexorably down. The killer's breath was loud in her ear. For a fleeting second, ego overcame pain. She had been right, but that wouldn't do her 1 ounce of good if she was the next victim. Blood and dirt spat from her mouth as she gasped out words. You're assaulting a police officer. I have backup on the way. Liar! Fucking liar! A hand twisted in her hair, lifting her head for one final smash on the rock. Then a man's voice roared close behind. The weight lifted from her back and she yelled as a handful of hair was torn from her scalp. She crowbarred herself onto her hands and knees, pain scorching through every bone. Through a curtain of blood and hair, she saw a dark man, his arms locked around a writhing shape that flailed and screamed like a banshee, long tangled hair flying, the moonlight bleaching it of all colour. It might have been white rather than pink. On her knees, Fraser dragged her handcuffs from her belt and crawled towards them. As Joe Ingalls forced her attacker to the ground, she clamped her arms around the woman's legs, crawling up her body until she reached a wrist and snapped a cuff in place. Grunting with exertion, Joe brought the woman's other arm around to join it and took the metal circlet almost gently from Fraser's hand to close it over Claire's other wrist. Fraser rested her forehead on the ground and thanked first God and then Joe Ingalls. Beneath the Devil's Chair, Fraser sat on a chunk of quartzite while Marianne bandaged her head with a sterile dressing from the first aid kit in Fraser's bag. Opposite sat John Davis, his head in his hands. Joe Ingalls stood silent, eyes on Marianne and one hand on Claire's elbow, though she made no move to escape. Washed of all her usual vibrant colour by the moonlight, hands cuffed behind her back, she spat invective. Bitch! Fucking pervert! You're not a woman. Just because you paint your nails and mince around in women's clothes, that doesn't make you a woman. Whatever you've got now, you were born with a penis, and that makes you a man. There's nothing you can say that I haven't heard before. Fraser winced as Marianne pressed tape in place to hold the bandage. Unless you're going to tell me why you killed Anna Price. That stopped her mid-flow. John Davis's head snapped up as though it was on elastic. I know why you killed Lucy, Fraser said. She saw you that afternoon, coming out of Perkins Beach above the Devil's Pool. But Anna? Why kill her? As if I'd have bothered killing her, Claire hissed, face twisted like a gargoyle. She was a bore who couldn't take no for an answer. She even had to follow me here, didn't she? Making a booking to stay at the bunkhouse, like it was some coincidence. What the? John Davis half rose from where he crouched, then sat heavily again. He seemed in deep shock. She came here to find her birth mother. I tried to stop her. Claire's eyes swivelled around to him, flashing contempt. Oh, poor stupid Martin. Oops, sorry, John. And all your efforts to save her from herself were in vain. She was lying to you, you pathetic twat. That murdering ex-whore, she gestured at Marianne, wasn't her mother. I found that out for her ages ago. Joe jerked at her arm with a muttered, "Hey!" and Claire shook him off angrily, took a step back towards the first stacks of the chair. It was you, she said to Davis, with a laugh that sent a chill right down to Fraser's toes. Everyone knows it was you, and if that stupid cow, she eyeballed Marianne again, hadn't got in the way, they'd have found you dead on the Devil's throne, a suicide note clutched in your fist. How it was all an accident. Anna desperate to find her mother, you desperate to stop her. Do you know what they think, she said, laughing again, that you were her boyfriend, as if she'd ever have looked at you. You're pathetic. That's what she thought of you. Pathetic and needy and wrong in the head. Davis was on his feet, fury etched deep in his face. She cared about me. He moved towards Claire, who climbed onto a nearby stack, balancing herself with her pinioned arms. Her face twisted into a sneering grin. She despised you. Joe Ingalls put a hand on Davis's arm and pulled him back. Leave her, he said. She's not worth it. Fraser's head felt like it might split in two, and every so often her vision swam, bringing with it a wave of nausea. Where the hell was Corby? Or Pitbull? Surely he'd have sent some of the team from Shrewsbury. Surely he'd got her message. How did you persuade John to come up here? She said to Claire, playing for time. In the state she was in, she wasn't sure she'd make it back down to the bunkhouse, and she could hardly leave Joe Ingalls and Marianne to make a citizen's arrest. Besides, Claire had killed twice. Even in handcuffs, Fraser didn't trust her. Claire laughed again, shrill, flinging her head back. She climbed a little higher towards the cairn, then spun back towards them. Madness seemed to make her sure-footed on the wet rock. How do you think? Sex, of course, she said. Men will do anything for the promise of sex, won't they? Besides, poor, sad, bereaved Johnny wanted comfort, didn't he? Wanted love. Pathetic, she spat again. I trusted you, Davis said, his voice woven with tears and disbelief. I thought... Claire, come down, Marianne said as Claire scrambled higher still. The first words she'd uttered since Fraser had staggered into their midst, with Joe frog-marching his captive behind her. You'll fall. Claire let out a shriek of laughter, which pierced Fraser's pounding head. You think I care? You think I give an actual fuck? My whole life is ruined because that stupid girl wouldn't bloody leave me alone. What happens now, eh? She'd reached the cairn atop the chair, feet astride its base and head reared like the figurehead of a sailing ship. Suddenly Fraser knew what she planned to do and tried to get up, but her head swam and she gagged on a mouthful of vomit. Marianne pushed her back down, but Joe Ingalls had seen the danger too, started off up the rocky tower after Claire. As Claire's body teetered on the cairn, a massive shape showed behind her, and her scream of rage tore the air. Joe slipped, swearing as he clutched for a handhold. Time was arrested while they waited for her to crash to the rocks below. Instead, she hovered, writhing, as if glued to the rocks by some invisible force. Then Corby's voice came from the darkness beyond.
Claire Ursid, I'm arresting you for the murders of Anna Price and Lucy Hawkins. You do not have to say anything. Oh, good, you've already cuffed her.
Claire, struggling wildly, was being hauled in by Roger Taylor, who'd grabbed a fistful of jacket and now slung a climbing rope around her midriff. From the shadow of the rocks, Corby emerged, followed seconds later by D.S. Chowdhury, still in his fashionable suit.
Better finish that caution,
he said, and while Corby did so, he looked around at the motley group assembled at the base of the Devil's Chair.
You all right, boss?
He said. Fraser's head was swimming again, and she was aware of the sound of rushing water. She just had time to register the thought that surely there was no stream this high up when everything went black.